morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on when you're watching this video. My name is Mutsawashe Mbaiwa. I'm a lecturer in the Management, Accounting and Finance Department, and today I'm going to revise with you the ITC 2019 June exams, mock exam 2, specifically required F. So our required F read, with regards to 21st, which is the company that we are evaluating today, evaluate the financing of the acquisition of Q brand through the medium-term loan or through the issue of preference shares. So number one, we needed to calculate and determine which instrument will be more cost effective for 21st to use, and secondly, to discuss any other factors. So likely these any other factors are your qualitative factors that 21st should consider in deciding which instrument to use, giving us a grand total of 14 marks. So from the scenario, I've specifically scoped out the rest of the sections of the required, and I've jumped right into the financing alternatives. So it reads, 21st is considering various financing alternatives for the Q brand acquisition, which can be individual or a combination thereof. So first of all is payment of using existing cash reserves. So for the purposes of our required one, this specific section has been scoped out, which moves us next to financing option 2, which is obtaining a 130 million rand medium-term loan from Nedbank South Africa. The board is hoping to leverage their relationship with Nedbank Zimbabwe to obtain the financing required from Nedbank South Africa. The loan will bear an interest at 1% above the prevailing South African prime overdraft rate of 9.5% per annum. So this is the company's incremental cost of borrowing. The loan is to be repaid in one bullet payment at the end of 4 years. Interest is to be calculated and compounded annually in arrears and capitalized to the outstanding loan balance. And transaction cost of 1% of the principal amount will be payable at inception of the medium-term loan. And our second option is the issue of compulsory convertible preference shares with a par value of $10 million. The preference shares will be entitled to an annual dividend calculated as 80% of the prevailing Zimbabwe prime overdraft rate multiplied by the par value of shares held. 21st is required to pay preference dividend annually in arrears, and there is no discretion with regard to declaring these dividends. Each preference share will automatically convert into one ordinary share after 4 years. Analysts predict that the value of the converted shares at the end of the 4 years will amount to 12 million, and that the Zimbabwe prime overdraft rate will average 11.5% over the 4-year period. Now, in helping us to decide in terms of cost effectiveness, which instrument we should use. So first of all, option 2 and option 3 are both being evaluated for the same period, that is for 4 years. So to this extent, we can compare the medium-term loan as well as the convertible preference shares, due to the fact that they have the same what? They have the same period, which is 4 years. Now, for us to determine cost effectiveness, we need to calculate something. So for us to calculate something, we need to calculate our IRR, or rather the cost of capital. So it is from this cost of capital that where the cost effectiveness stems from. So for the preference shares, I needed to calculate the preference shares. I needed to calculate the cost of the preference shares. And for the loan, I also needed to calculate the cost of the debt. And then I compare my options between preference shares and the loan option in terms of cost, and I select the most appropriate method or instrument which reduces the cost for 21st. Now going back to our scenario, for us to be able to calculate our medium-term loan in terms of the cost, we've been given the present value of the loan, which is 130 million, and then from the 130 million, a transaction cost of 1% of the principal amount will be payable at inception of the medium-term loan. So by the time we receive the money from the bank, it will be 130 million less 1% multiplied by the same 130 million, which is the transaction cost. So in terms of my present value, I'll be left with something like 128,000.7 million. So this becomes my present value. And as we go back again to our scenario, we are now told in terms of the interest payments, the loan will bear an interest of at 1% above the prevailing South African prime rate of 9.5%. So per annum interest is 10.5%. And interest is calculated and compounded annually in arrears and capitalized to the outstanding loan balance. So dating back to your undergraduate studies or even your O-level or A-level studies, I'm sure you covered the principle of how we calculate interest or how we compound our interest. So I'm not going to specifically cover it, but I'm going to demonstrate, for example, in the first year. So in terms of the interest, in year 1, my interest will be what? 10.5% of how much? 10.5% of 130 million. So I calculate my interest on the principal and not on the present value that I received. So if you are to calculate 10.5% of 130 million, you get an interest payment of how much? Of 13.65 million. I hope we are together as you are multiplying. So this is the interest from year 1. So now, as I move forward to year 2, if I'm compounding my interest annually, and then I am now moving on to year 2, what do I now need to do? So to this extent, of the 130 million, how much have I paid back? From the beginning of year 2, I still haven't paid any single cent from the 130 million. So if you go back, it says it is compounded annually in arrears and capitalized onto the outstanding loan balance, which now means if I'm to go forward, in terms of my capital, I am now calculating 10.5% multiplied by 130 million rand plus the 13.65 interest, which I have capitalized. So if I'm to add, I get a grand total of, I'm now multiplying 10.5% multiplied by 143.65 million rand, giving me interest payments of 15.08 now in terms of my interest. and going on and on and on, right up until I've completed up to year 4. So I'm sure, having given you the skeleton, you can be able to now go back and you can calculate for yourself how you calculate the interest. Now, I now have my present value. I now have my interest payments. Now, by the end of year 4, I should now be able to calculate the future value from year 4. So if you are to calculate the future value payments from year 4, I'm sure if you calculate, you're supposed to be getting a future value by the end of year 4. Your future value, which is obtained in year 4, should be equal to, if you calculate, your loan, it should now be equal to 193.8283, depending on your rounding off. So this now becomes your future value. I've calculated the present value, which is the 128.7 million rand, and I've calculated my interest payments. From there, I'm now able to calculate my IRR. How do I calculate my IRR? I have cash flows in year 0, cash inflow in year 0, 128 million. From year 1 up to year 4, in terms of the interest payments, I have a 0. Why do I have a 0? Because if I go back to the scenario, I'm only told, if I go back to the scenario, the key guiding word now is the loan is to be repaid in one single bullet. So with regards to the loan, so far I have not paid anything up until year 4, where I now have the future value of 193.82 billion, which included the interest that we've been compounding annually. That's why we were compounding the interest annually in arrears. So from there, I now have cash flows, and from there, if I have my cash flows, I can calculate my IRR, bearing in mind that the IRR is the rate which results in a net present value of 0. So I'm sure you can be able to maneuver your way through in terms of calculation of the loan. And then if you are to calculate, your final answer should be 23.09%. That will be the cost of the loan. Now let's move on to the cost of the preference shares. So if we were to go back again to our scenario, it appears the preference shares have characteristics similar to debt financing, where we have our par value, which is my present value. I can be able to calculate an annual dividend, which results in my PMT. Why? Because they are required to pay the dividends annually in arrears, and 21st has no discretion with regards to declaring these dividends. So this PMT is a definite payment by the end of each financial period. And then at the end of the 4 years, I'm also told that the shares will amount to 12 million, which is my future value. And then the period is now the 4 years is highlighted earlier. So from there, using my financial calculator, I input N is equals to 4, my PMT, which is the 80% of how much? 80% of it says 80% of the Zimbabwe prevailing primary rate multiplied by the par value number of shares held. So if I'm to calculate My shares were at par, which was 10 million at par, and my prime rate was 11.5%. I'm sure if you calculate from there, 10.5%. From there, if I'm to calculate, I obtain my PMT, and then my future value I've been given, which is the 12 million, and then my present value, I also have it, the 10 million. From there, I compute my cost of capital, and I get about 13.3 something percent. Now from there, I now need to compare the cost from the preference shares, which is a 13.3%, versus the cost of the loan, which is the 23.09%. So if I'm to select the instrument which is cost effective, I'm going to select the one with the lower cost, and this is the one. The preference share option is the one which is most cost effective. So your take home point from this calculation, or from this required, in terms of required A, part 1, you were given what the characteristics of each instrument which you are supposed to now use, and the other take home point is cost effective. Which tool can I use to demonstrate a cost effective financing instrument? So you're supposed to use the information that you've been given to come up with a solution. So in terms of the quantitativeness, we have selected the compulsory convertible preference shares because they are the cost effective, which now takes us to required 2. Now discussing any other factors that 21st should consider besides this quantitative factor. We now as well go back to the individual components or the characteristics of the loan and the convertible preference shares. So I'm to obtain a loan from South Africa and hoping to leverage the relationship that I have with the Nedbank Zimbabwe. If I had no relationship with Nedbank Zimbabwe, was I going to obtain this loan from Nedbank South Africa? Or in the event that the relationship with Nedbank Zimbabwe fails to give me my expected outcome, am I still going to obtain a loan from this Nedbank South Africa if I submit their requirements in terms of us as 21st pursuing a loan? And in terms of the loan, again, we're told that we have an additional incremental cost of borrowing of 1% above the normal South African prime overdraft rate of 9.5% per annum. Now, we all understand that debt increases the financial risk of an entity. So the more we obtain a loan, we are going to obtain what? We're going to obtain additional financing risk. And the more financing risk that we obtain, the equity holders will demand a higher return to compensate them for the additional risk. So this incremental cost of borrowing, is it something that we are happy with? Will it not affect the required rate of return now being demanded by our equity holders? And we're also told that the loan will be repaid in one bullet payment. So in terms of this loan, by the time we reach the 4 years, are we financially able to pay back this loan? And you could also consider the likely impact of the transaction cost of the 1% on the 130 rand. Is it significant? Was it going to affect us positively, negatively, and so on? So in this discussion, you are picking from the information that you've been given, and you are now analyzing per instrument how the likely implications of the instrument positively and negatively. is 21st going to benefit or is it going to not benefit? Looking at the preference shareholders, both options, they are supposed to pay for the loan in interest payment, and for the preference shareholders a dividend payment, and these are mandatory payments. So will 21st have enough or liquid resources to pay these cash flows? And for the preference shareholders now, we are told that these preference shareholders will automatically convert into what? Ordinary share. So this likely have an effect on our shareholding structure. So these were some of the things that we needed to consider. What else would they have considered? We could have considered that analysts predict the value at the end of the 4 years to be 12 million. How did they come up with this predicted value? And then how did they come up with the average of the prime rate and so on? All of this was for us, in order for us to obtain this 6 marks, giving us a grand total of 14 marks. So with this in mind, we have concluded our discussion of the required F on the financing alternatives for us to acquire the Q brand. So if you have any further questions as you've gone through the solution, you've gone through this revision video, please feel free to visit us for a one-on-one consult, or you can send a WhatsApp message, or you can email manfin@caa.ac.zw for any of your specific queries. Thank you.